Welcome back to another episode of Nerding Out with Viktor. Today, I'm joined by Marc Pous.
Hi, Viktor. How are you?
Good. So, we've known each other for quite a while, and you work for a company called Balena. And this episode is going to be about Balena, IoT, security, and everything in between. But I guess before we dive in, who's Marc? What should we know? You are, yes, for people who are in the community, known as IoT Giant. And first time I met you in person, it became painstakingly clear why you have that nickname, because you are about, I'm not short, but you're about head and a half taller than me. So
and
yeah,
you're not
let's start
short,
there.
Right?
I'm not short. I'm like 6 foot, so I'm not short. But you are good, like 2 feet taller than me, or at least a head taller than me, if not.
No, I had problems with that nickname actually, but in the past, but yeah.
Fair enough. Well, let's talk about that. Who's Marc? What should we know?
Yeah, my name is Marc Pous. I'm based in Barcelona. I'm a computer engineer. And I would say that since 2007, I have been working on IoT projects. So before, I think IoT concept was already coined maybe at that 2007 maybe. But I started connecting in the university for a master thesis project, wheelchairs that were going autonomous through hospitals.
Okay.
And the idea was to interconnect each others and so on. So this is the first time in 2007 when I started to see what was the Internet of Things. We didn't have iPhones or anything like that, so still PDAs. And then I moved as a web developer for a couple of years, and then I get into the research again. And I was doing applied research on smart cities, IoT, and so on. And in 2012, I decided to create my own startup. So I was seeing that, the IoT products were starting to be a thing. There was a big hype at that moment as well. So I created a company to enable companies to store data from their connected devices and allow them to have dashboards, mobile applications for their customers, and so on and so on. And it was kind of good. We had some success, but at some point, we couldn't make it happen more. So in 2020, we closed down the company. We sold it to another company, and then I was thinking, okay, where I would like to work in the IoT space. I have never done anything out of IoT. So, and one of the companies that I already knew from my previous company that was called The Things.io was Resin. Then I searched Resin on Google, and it was Balena. So I applied, and luckily I get hired here. And next month it will be my 5th anniversary in Balena. In parallel. Sorry, it's a long introduction.
No, that's fine.
In parallel, in 2010, approx, I created the IoT community in Barcelona and in Munich. I was living in Munich at that time with my wife. So I was traveling every month to Barcelona. So I created both IoT communities, and I started to create, a bottom-up community building. For the Internet of Things. I'm still having IoT Barcelona. I don't live anymore in Munich, so someone else took care of it. And then in parallel of the IoT Barcelona meetups, I also organize something called IoT Stars, which is a community of IoT professionals and thought leaders. And basically we do events in big events such as Mobile World Congress or Embedded World. So if you want to meet IoT, so actually it's the 10th anniversary this year of IoT Stars. So my initial idea was I want to meet IoT people coming to Mobile World Congress.
Yeah.
So let's do something for them. And this is how, it all starts. So this will be the 10th anniversary, and super exciting to have like 200 people every event.
Very cool. Yeah, I was in Barcelona about this time last year, and I spoke at your event.
For ISC, no?
Yeah, well, ISC has literally happened the day today. We're recording on the first day of ISC, actually.
Okay.
So last year we spoke there. So there's a lot to unpack there, but let's focus more. Let's start with focusing on the Balena side, because I think there will be a lot of stuff there. So for those not familiar with Balena, can you do kind of an elevator pitch? Obviously, I've been involved indirectly with the company for quite some time, and just give it like an elevator pitch. What's Balena, and what should we know?
Yeah, absolutely. So Balena, it's a company that enables developers to manage their fleets of IoT devices. So basically, when you have 1, 2, 3 when you're prototyping on your desk as a embedded developer or IoT developer. So it's not a problem to reflash devices and so on. But when they are into the wild, when you have hundreds of thousands of devices, it's really hard to update the operating system remotely, update the application running on them, access remotely to check the logs and so on. So basically at Balena, what we do is we help companies who have fleets of IoT devices in the wild to manage them remotely, basically. And we do this in a special way. We only focus on Linux devices. So we have, they need to run our Linux operating system called Balena OS. And this Balena OS has as well something special that it only runs Docker containers. So what we try to do at the beginning, and maybe we are going to talk about this, it's to bring this web or DevOps knowledge that people had into the embedded world to enable more developers to be able to interact with embedded devices. And the idea is that, we help nowadays hundreds of customers worldwide that basically are managing remotely their fleets of devices, updating the applications, but as well updating the operating system version and so on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I got to know Alex and Petros, who are the founders of Balena. This must have been close to 10 years ago, back in London. And they started off roughly the same time we started Screenly. So we were speaking with them early on to be a customer of Balena. We didn't end up for whatever reasons, but we ended up going to the core. And ever since, we've been comparing notes one way or other with various people at Balena, right? And but going back to those early days, what really put Resin, as it was called back then, on the map was that I believe Petros was the one who did the first ARM port of Docker, right? He ported Docker, which was a new thing then, to ARM, right?
Absolutely.
And that was a big thing, right?
Yeah, that was, I think, state of the art, right? I think this idea of bringing, I have watched, I joined 5 years ago, so I was not in the initial days, but actually, let me tell you something. In 2014, I had my own startup and I got funded. And then TechCrunch approached me and interviewed me about the first funding round and so on. So when they launched the news that my startup has been founded, actually they talk about two companies, mine and Resin.io. And because it was the hype of IoT and so on, so they were like, hey, the hype is true. IoT startups has been funded, blah blah blah. And then I had a call with Alex, and this is why I knew Resin from that moment, because we at that moment started to talk. We couldn't collaborate because we were a little bit far away, and any customer wanted to work together. But I think this idea of why a web developer can update a website if there is a typo in minutes, and an embedded developer, if there is a bug on an IoT device, can take days or hours, right, to update all the embedded devices out there.
Yeah, so exactly. And fun side story, I'm sure you already know this, but Balena or Resin was actually founded as an artifact for another company that Alex and Petros were doing. It was actually a digital signage company out of in London, and that's how they actually created Balena, right? So Balena and Screenly actually share a lot of things together, actually. And I had a lot of conversations with Alex and Petros, who are no longer active in the company anymore. It should be said as well. Otherwise, I would have brought them on. But today is about Balena today. So, but I think it's important to state the importance of this shift that happened around that, because Balena were one of the few next generation of IoT companies that started around the 2010-ish time or so, around that era, where I think you hit the head on the nail there with like bringing a new workflow into the embedded space, right? Because you spend a lot of time in hardware, you know how detached embedded dev flows are from, and even today, from how we work with DevOps, right?
Indeed. No, absolutely. And the way to bring new technologies to enable new type of developers into the embedded, this is amazing.
Yeah, and if you go down to the image, like it's really like you're shipping a Docker container at the end of the day to. I guess we should be clarifying that it's not a well, embedded can mean a lot of things to different people, right? But we're not. I guess now you do support ESP32s and the likes off through proxy, right? But in the early days, it was basically just Raspberry Pis that you could run Docker on and manage it centrally, right? So maybe talk about that evolution a bit from going to, I guess, for strict IoT people, Raspberry Pi is not an embedded device. They think it's way too high powered for being called an embedded device, right? But maybe talk about that evolution a little bit from like adding support for more devices.
Yeah. The thing is that we don't support microcontrollers. We only support Linux operated devices. And basically, yeah, Resin was the first one to be compatible. So to make Docker containers running on Raspberry Pis or ARM devices, and basically this is, so we are using Yocto as the framework to build Balena OS, and all the work that is behind Yocto enabled us to make Balena OS compatible, or Resin OS at that time compatible with other device types. Historically, what happened is that we made ARM devices has been a bit tricky to do the configurations to boot them up to be compatible with Balena and all, because we need all the Yocto layers and the Yocto VSPs and so on. But for example, something that has been super easy to make compatible with Balena are the x86 devices. So we have nowadays we have about more than 100 different ARM devices compatible with Balena OS, and then a big chunk of x86 devices that with just one generic base image, it's compatible with Balena OS. And what happened at some point when I was at Balena is that it was really hard to manage all of these multiple versions and device types, or multiple versions of operating systems for all of these types of devices. So we decided at some point to stop getting new device types, because the problem that we had is that, so operating systems have bugs or requires new kernel versions and so on, or new drivers. So it was really hard to get all device types on the same OS version or the same kernel version. It required a lot of people to take care of that. So what we did, we tried to automatize that. So we created a concept of something called Autokit, which is basically multiple devices interconnected with the device that you want to run, where you want to run Balena. And basically what that does, it's that automatically runs tests for new versions of operating system for that device type.
Right. Okay.
So what we have is in Greece, we have our headquarters, and we have a wall full of Autokits with all the device types that we support. So when there is a new version of the operating system, we run tests on all of them in parallel, and we see which ones, all the tests have been accepted. So that means a new version with a new kernel and drivers runs properly, and the ones who need to tune a little bit more or something. So at that moment, we decided to stop. The operating system people and the devices people decided to stop having new devices compatible with Balena OS and start to work more with the Autokit. And now, luckily, it starts to work. So we see a lot more devices that when we want to have one device compatible with Balena, what we mean, it's not only that we work on having all the Yocto VSPs and so on and flash them or compile them with Yocto and get Balena OS, but as well to have this device on Autokit physically. So when there is a new version of the operating system, it will get into the latest one and it will be compatible with it. So
it's funny.
Go ahead.
We ended up doing something similar for Screenly actually, because we have in our Atlanta office, we have basically like a big wall of just monitors, and it's just tracking various versions across various hardware. And we run checks on that, and we can see when things are failing. So like when you're doing hardware, you need space to do all these things, right?
Exactly. You need an ops room. No, and it's actually very tricky because for security reasons, it's really important to have the operating system version updated, right?
Yes.
But it's a huge. I understand that for developers, updating operating systems sometimes can be really painful, because a operating system update can break your application. No, we were talking, for example, with customers who use NVIDIA devices. So updating the operating system of NVIDIA basically brings the NVIDIA Jetsons, Orange brings changes that will break absolutely your application, your device, your partitions, everything. So there are customers that say, look, with this version, with these versions of operating system frameworks and so on, my application works. I don't want to touch it. And now we need to start re-educating again developers.
You're touching on something very important here, which is this is one of those things that you don't know until you've actually done it in the real world. Because particularly in the early days where you're doing IoT, right? You're like, oh yeah, I'm going to prototype this on a board here. And oh great, now I have something works. Cool. And then you fast forward a few years. So you're like, oh, now I have 5,000 of these in the wild. How do I do OTA? Right. And even to this day, there are not that many battle tested OTA platforms out there. Balena being one of them. Right. Mm-hmm. But it's one of those things that you don't know until you know. So it's kind of like a problem that people realize further down in the pipeline when they've actually got real customer. They're like, oh shit, we need to fix this bug today. And they're like, all right, reflash 5,000 devices. Not going to happen, right? So it's definitely like a learning thing that I think people have to get to, and you wouldn't know until you know kind of scenario.
Yeah.
But let's go into how it actually works. So you're baking the images with Yocto, which is kind of like a fairly well established, or probably the most established platform. What we need to do then is to like put layers on top of it, of course, for the boards and whatnot. And what you have in your, I guess, secret sauce is in part the OTA layer, right? That's kind of like the secret sauce for Balena. So maybe talk a bit more about how that works, how you orchestrate that at scale, and kind of lessons learned so far.
Yeah. So basically, taking advantage of Docker containers, right? That works with layers. What basically we do in very high level, we have the Balena builders. So when you push your applications to Balena, basically our builders check differences from previous applications to the current one, and we generate a delta that will get to all of your devices. So yeah, and if it's your first application, basically it's going to happen. It's a bunch of layers from the Docker containers, basically, will be pushed to your devices. Your devices, basically, if they run Balena OS, they run a container, which is a kind of invisible, that is called supervisor. The supervisor is the agent that runs on the devices that basically connects between the device and Balena Cloud or Open Balena, the Balena platform, the fleet management platform, in real time. So it knows when it's possible to download the new images or the new layers or deltas. And then it makes the secure communication between the fleet management platform and the devices. So basically, the supervisor checks there is a new update. Yes. When the device is ready, starts downloading. We have AV partitions. So basically in the new partition, there is the new version and boots in the new version, in the new partition, sorry. And if it works perfectly, that's the new partition that.
And then you route everything over VPN as well, right? So that making sure things are, as you start deploying into more enterprise environment, you know how fiddly gets to get things whitelisted. So I guess that was the pragmatic solution. It's just like, you just got to route everything over a VPN session, right?
It's tricky in specific use cases like industrial machines and so on. But
and I know, as an anecdote, at one point at least, I'm not sure this trend more, Balena was the biggest users in terms of bandwidth for Docker Hub as well. I think that might not no longer be true, but I heard in the grapevine that at one point in time, Balena was one of the biggest data hogs for entire Docker Hub as well. So I guess speaks to scale.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. No, in a scaling point of view, yeah, we have an amazing team of engineers and DevOps that clearly makes this super easy. And and now it's you see the statistics, and it's amazing how you see like hundreds of thousands of there are fleets of hundreds of thousands of devices, and when they do Balena push, you see that
Yeah.
in the last one I have seen, it's 90,000 devices that in less than 1 hour, more than
90.
95%, yeah, 90,000, yeah, 90.
Oh wow.
In less than 1 hour, 95% were updated.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's an impressive number.
So yeah.
And I think it's worth pausing a bit on that. You mentioned A/B partitioning, and like it's funny because when we started evaluating operators for Screenly way back when, we started on Raspbian, which turned out is not a great platform to scale at, and we actually needed to have all these OTA platforms. So we tried to make it work, but in reality, it didn't actually work when you hit certain scale. And this is the era of CoreOS, right? Where CoreOS became popular, and they kind of had this new paradigm of this A/B partitioning, everything read-only, and you got adopted in one way, Ubuntu Core adopted it in a different way, but that kind of became the path forward for, I guess, high-powered embedded devices, right? And that is such an important functionality. Yeah, go ahead.
And I think it was as well the way that microcontrollers work, right? I think.
Yeah, so, it's probably rides from that even earlier legacy. That's absolutely true, right? But I guess CoreOS brought that to the server farms, which is now Flatcar for what it's worth, which has also been ported to. I just came back from FOSDEM this weekend, and they've ported Flatcar now to RISC-V. So now you can actually run Flatcar as well. But that's a different generation of operators entirely. But so this is really interesting, like building these at scale, because I think that's when people don't really realize how hard it is to do this at scale, right? Because there are so many things that can go wrong, and in particular with upgrades, in particular, right?
Absolutely. So you can convert your devices into bricks, right? Check Sonos.
Yes.
And there are multiple examples in the.
Yeah, it doesn't take much, right? There are so many horror stories in the world of IoT of remote bricking, right? So it's definitely a thing to be concerned with. So you push as a developer, you push your code to, well, essentially it's a hook on a Git commit, essentially, right? That triggers a build on your end, pushes images to the registry, which in turn pulls it down to your fleet of devices, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's slightly oversimplified, but I think that's the best way to describe it, right? So that's interesting. And you talked a bit about x86. That was announced, 2 years ago? You launched your x86 3 years ago, maybe?
No, actually, 2 years ago, we launched the secure boot and full disk encryption on x86. So
that's
no, x86 has been there for a lot of. I'm not sure when did we launch it, but when I joined, it was already there. A couple of years ago, we announced the full disk encryption and secure boot, and I cannot say anything, but soon you're going to see ARM secure boot and full disk encryption.
Ooh, with trust zones. Interesting. That's going to be interesting for sure. So let's talk more about some interesting use case and how people are actually using Balena. Like, I guess the first question is, like, what's the craziest thing you've seen Balena being used for?
That's a very good question. I don't know. I have seen a lot of crazy things. Let me go, if I need to talk about crazy things, let me go to my previous startup where I saw.
Sure.
Yeah, because I was in contact with a customer. It was even more crazy. So I remember to connect toilets or showers to the internet.
Oh,
When
wow,
in the meetings, I was like, why the hell do you want to connect a shower into the internet? No, what is the value? Who do you think it's going to pay for that, right? At that moment, I started to get more interested on business models of IoT. Like, who's going to pay for that?
Yes.
And it was a big discussion. But they were a bit arrogant. Like, we are the biggest. They were manufacturing. I don't know specifically the name in English, but the specific part of showers, and they were like the number one in the world, and they were super arrogant. Like, yeah, people want it for sure. We are the leaders. We know the trends.
Right.
Whatever. Yeah. 5 years afterwards, I haven't seen still a shower connected to the internet. But
I
I'm
see very
sure
little
people.
utility in that.
In the other hand, in support. So one thing that is interesting in Balena is that everyone is on support, so you can talk with a lot of customers when they have problems and try to help them. And I remember one. I didn't know the use case, but I remember that in their case, one of the problems of Raspberry Pis, as you probably know, is the SD cards. And I remember that the one we told to one that this device, it has a problem with SD card, so you need to go and change the SD card. And they were complaining like, you're gonna do that? Like, I'm not doing anything. I need 3 days by donkey to get into that device. So like, okay, I don't want to know what's a use case or what, but someone 3 days by donkey looks like I don't know, it's something important, right? In the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean that's another conversation. I touched on this a bit. I had Ibn Apta on the show a while back. We talked a bit about SD cards, and we have traded notes a lot over the years about what works and what doesn't. And you kind of alluded to this already, which is like SD cards break. The biggest, by order of magnitude, the biggest failure point of the Raspberry Pi is the SD card, right? Yeah. And we've compared notes on the best cards. I think we came up with the same SD card. I think both of us are using the SanDisk Extreme as one of the more reliable one, or the industrial one version of that. But let's talk more about that, because you guys do some really interesting things around analysis on SD cards as well, like to make sure, like predict failures, and not maybe predict, but like understanding one metric. Maybe talk a bit about that and how you managed to kind of like improve that experience with knowing that SD cards will eventually break.
Yeah, I'm not sure technically how it works, but what we created at some point, it's a diagnostics section on Balena Cloud for each device, so you could run diagnostics and get all the logs and everything. Then there is an algorithm that checks that potentially the memory can have a problem. So that's the first symptom or signal where you can see that the symptom is that the SD card has a problem. And if it's an SD card, so it's probably that.
Yeah.
So sometimes engineers that are more experts on that part of the devices, they have it they see it very clear when that signal is there. But I think they are running multiple. I'm not sure. I don't know honestly what we run on the Linux on the scripts that we are running. I think they are there on Balena Cloud, but when the symptoms are there, the signals are pretty clear.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. But long of the short is that what's your current recommendation for SD cards, by the way, for the audience? What most reliable SD card?
Lately we don't see that many errors, to be honest. 3 years ago it was like a plague. So I think the SD card industry has improved themselves a lot. We usually we used to ask what type of SD card they were using. And then we were recommending, these SD, what do you mention, the Ultra something that is black and red.
Yeah.
But it also depends on. So usually, when I found those use cases or those cases in support, I was not recommending a straightforward that specifically. I was asking more about the use case that they needed, if they had a lot of input output, or they had something else, because there are different SD cards for each use case. So I have examples of SD cards that mean if you have a lot of input output, it's better to have one specific one. If you have like big files, it's maybe another one. So it always depends. So we were recommending always the same, but looks like it always depends, right? On what
the classic consultant answer.
Exactly.
All right, cool. So, but what are the most common use cases for running Balena today? Is it, I mean, pretty much industrial or more high power devices? Like, talk a bit more about the average customer, how people are using Balena today.
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. Basically, we see a lot of industrial for sure. I would say that 25% is industrial IoT devices. We see a lot of gateway examples from connected home to LoRaWAN gateways and similar, which yeah, as they are in the middle of nowhere or they are in our houses, right? Routers and so on. It makes a lot of sense to have this remote management system. And then we see a lot of edge AI lately.
Okay.
So edge AI, well, digital signage as well, maybe a small percentage, but a lot of edge AI nowadays, a lot of cameras running a lot of machine learning in the edge, and then sending. And yeah, last week we were at our annual summit, and basically we could meet some of our customers there,
Mm-hmm.
and it was super interesting to see. Yeah, like there was a couple of them that were edge AI, and it's really nice when you see someone who says, "I could focus on my business because you just solved everything else." So,
Right. Okay.
so that's perfect when you
Yeah.
listen that from a customer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's good. A good score. So let's talk a bit about something that is a pain in the IoT world in general, which is pricing. Because the reality is that everybody want to have a flat one-time cost, but the reality is that somebody got to fork the bill for ongoing maintenance for all these devices. And I've heard stories about some of the larger companies and like how small their budgets are for doing things like OTA. So with the rise of CRA, which is coming into effect in the European Union soon, these things will become far more of a focus area for companies. So how do you guys see this? I know you have something called Open Balena, which is basically the open source version of Balena that you can run yourself. But maybe speaking about that, how you see that shifting. Is there a bigger awareness today of that things actually do have to cost money to maintain, or how has that changed over your tenure so far?
That's one of my favorite questions, to be honest. I can talk here for hours. Huh? And let me zoom out for a bit, okay? Because this is talking about OTA price, and if it's cheap or not. It's just part of all the system. So let's focus maybe on, I mentioned before, business models for these connected products, and this is important. So I think a lot of companies, at least 10 years ago, they were not. So most of the companies were not used to move from capex to opex. Yeah. So from having one-shot payment instead of monthly payments for a specific service, I think now the industry has, with the SaaS, all the industries has been into this understanding that.
Well, that's very geographical as well. Certain geographies are far slower to adopt that. DACH comes to mind, in particular, of a kind of more pushbacks on that than, say, North America. But yes.
Yeah, but I understand, for example, for an industry, right, for a factory or for multiple factories who used to buy machines that cost millions of dollars. It's so you pay just once, right, and you have a machine for 100 years or 50 years or whatever.
Yeah.
So tell them, no, look, you are going to pay every month that, or I don't know what I'm going to pay every month. I'm going to pay something that could be variable, these or smaller.
Yes.
I understand that this brings a lot of uncertainty when this type of companies has a specific budget and you cannot live from there. So that's an important thing. And something else that it's as well important is that a lot of these solutions didn't bring a return of investment, a ROI, in that was very clear. So to tell to a factory that if you connect to the internet, all of your lines and all of the machines in your lines, you're gonna reduce by 10% your cost, but cost 8% of your cost, right? So you're gonna save 2. Who wants to bet on that, right? Who wants to? And then these machines are telling the expert guy who is running these machines to do something that they never made before. Like, what the fuck is happening here? No. Yeah. So I think it was really complex to convince companies to move towards this direction. So no clear return of investment, expensive devices or services to companies that didn't have budgets or the budgets were not clear for them. I think that was a really hard start for IoT at the beginning. So now that it looks like in some specific use cases there are return of investments, I think industrial IoT, it's really clear that companies, that factories or enterprises save a lot of money thanks to industrial IoT. Or help them to basically say, it's in multiple ways. Edge AI, I think there are clear business models there that show how to save money or to make money in specific cases. So I had clear in my mind that IoT projects basically needs to show really clear how to save money or make money on companies. If that was not clear enough or there was not a direct return of investment, it's really hard to demonstrate that an IoT project makes sense for a company. Then it comes. Then if we zoom in, one small part of these platforms or projects, it's the OTA. So
sorry,
the OTA,
Oh, those yes,
software updates. So if you don't have a clear business model, if you don't have a return of investment, right? So it could be expensive, but what does it mean expensive, right?
Yeah.
So if you're a company who are selling these machines for factories, and the OTA and more features, of course, cost $1 per month, let's say, as an example. You need to sell your service for much more, right? But is the return of investment that you bring to your customer higher than what you are charging them or not? So initially, when I was working at the things I own, my own startup, I was seeing that clearly that they were not creating business models that were sustainable for them or for anyone. So we were said, you are super expensive. But on the other hand, what was not clear was the return of investment, the business model, and so on. So I think now we are getting more mature into this. And I think that I see more and more companies where they can introduce overpricing into their added value on their companies, and they don't think that it's expensive or too much or too less.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're very much focused on industrial IoT, right, and industrial applications, and that you would have budget. Where it gets a lot more challenging is around consumer products, right, where you still need to be able to. Oh yeah, it's like, how do you can't quite pass on that cost to the consumer, right? You basically have to eat that, because it's very difficult to say to a consumer of a consumer product, oh, here's a $5 a month fee for you to operate your smart scale, which nobody would pay, right? So it's a difficult alignment.
Let's choose a smart scale as an example. Okay, so basically I can see that smart scale can cost, I don't know, $100.
Yeah.
How much it costs, a bill of materials?
Well, the BOM is probably in like, I don't know, $20, $20 probably at most, or maybe probably in that ballpark, right? And they retail for like a wee things probably retail for like what, $300-$400.
So how much is the OTA for 10 years? So let's think this way. What's expected life of your device? 3, 5, 10 years? How much is the OTA for 10 years? I'm sure that you can partner with a company who can maintain these OTA for that many years. But in this case, you're talking about microcontrollers.
But you bring up a very interesting point here, which is communicate life cycle is very important here, because that's a relatively new concept, but I think it's something that will work. It's been a concept in enterprise for ages, right? Like, well, it's EOL, end of life, and like that's it. Like, you can keep using it, but like you're on your own. But that concept has not really been a thing for consumer products before, right? Because it works, right? People just think of it as hardware, not software, right?
Yeah, well, I remember that when I was born in the 80s, my parents had the same scale that they still have today, right? And it doesn't need batteries and doesn't need anything, right? It's just a sensor that moves.
Right. Exactly.
But now I don't know. I'm not sure what's expected life of the Withings scale. Well, I don't know. We say Withings, but it can be anything, right?
Yes.
But I'm sure there are ways to pack all of these expected costs into the price and have a good return of investment for the company who actually sells B2C devices. The only problem, if you want to have a connected device, for B2B, as you mentioned, it's very easy. For B2C, there are some specific cases where we need to think about it.
Yeah, and B2B is easy because like most company will have a write-off period on a asset they buy anyway. So they're like, after 3 to 5 years, whatever it is, they're like, well, we're just going to replace it, regardless if it's, well, they know it's very well defined. Whereas your scale, it's not like you buy a scale, you're like, I bought the scale, it's going to last for 3 years. Now 3 years ago, I bid it. Like, it's not how the consumer world works, right?
The other thing that you need to think, in these cases of the scale, that it's free, probably you are the product, right?
Right.
So they have other business models where they think, okay, let's make this service free for users, but we are going to sell this. No? Probably when you do next, when you install and accept all the agreements, probably you are accepting that if you don't pay $29 per month, something pornographic, you are going to sell. They are going to sell your data.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably this is the business model that they have in this type of cases. But yeah, I don't know, in case of routers or things like that, I think the value that they bring you allow you to pay a subscription. So yeah, I don't know. I think it makes sense.
No, but it's just, I guess the summary is that life cycle needs to be part of the budget for a product where it's being built, right? You need to budget that in as part of, I guess you could say it's a BOM, but it's some kind of, it's a line item in your product, right? Where you say, this is going to last 5 years. My OTA budget and my maintenance budget is X, Y, and Z, right? Because I think that's the big shift, and kind of working our way back into the CRA, that's what's going to have to happen, right? Somebody needs to have a budget to actually fix these things on an ongoing basis, right? So maybe that's a nice segue over to CRA for how do you guys are seeing
let
that?
me tell you a story. Let me tell you a story from the things that you're on this. What we were talking before. Basically, we were working with a B2C company. Well, it was B2B2C, but yeah, it's okay. Let's simplify this. It was a B2C company selling a device for home. And basically, I remember that they told me that they didn't have enough memory to do OTA. So we were against, okay, so you cannot release your product if you don't have enough memory to allow OTAs on your device. They say, no, we need to launch the product because it's coming, that event, that we are going to need to launch it and start selling it. So what happened 6 months later is that they need to go to houses of 500 people with new hardware and basically bring the old one, put the new one with the updated software. So how much it costs this, right?
Yeah, that's a massively cost.
More than just wait, a couple of months, improve. Well, they needed to pay anyway, the software developers who were making the system more optimal to have enough space to allow OTAs. So you have to balance.
You got to pay for it one way or another, right? That's the reality. And
if you don't want to compromise your brand, your products.
Correct. Yeah, there's no shortage of brands out of China or selling on AliExpress that will happily sell you something that's already EOL before you even get it, right? Like I bought a swap-in car stereo unit, like an Android car thing for my car, and it was already, by the time I got it, running in the EOL version of Android, and I'm like, this is just crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the reality of like somebody got to pay, and again, now this brings us back to like the legal changes that are happening. Then how are you guys seeing that on Balena's side?
Yeah, we think that this is something super important, that all the companies are educated towards this direction. So we think that the CRA, or Cyber Resilience Act from the EU, will be a breakthrough for all the companies who will need to understand that security is important.
Yes.
Because you don't want to have your devices, your products, your brand compromised. You need risk assessment. You need to understand what's running on your devices. You need to have software BOM, bill of materials.
Yeah. Yes.
Understand what versions of things are you running, what kernels, what are the issues there. And this is really, really important to start educating people towards this. And one of the sad things is that every time that I talk with a company who make a connected product, they don't have any clue about CRA.
That's right. Yeah. No, I completely
sure,
relate to that. Yeah.
How do you see
no, I
that?
mean it's starting to propagate more and more. I mean, the EU version just finished in December, right? And then I think they have the individual countries have a year, I believe it is, to come up with a legislation where they interpret that document and codify that into law, right? But it's not far away. Like even you mentioned SBOMs, right? Even getting on top of SBOMs, unless you're a very savvy tech shop, a lot of companies will struggle, right? Like it's not a trivial matter, even as a sophisticated organization.
Absolutely not.
So
let me ask you a question. So what would you like to see on your software from managing point of view? What would you like to see once you are a CRA compliant? So if you can write your Santa's letter.
Yeah, like at the base of it comes down to an SBOM, I think. That's the deliverable, right? If you can give me an SBOM that is NTIA minimum element compliant, as a buyer, I wouldn't care if it's SPDX or Cyclone DX. I know you're a Yocto shop, so it's probably going to be SPDX, right? Because that's what Yocto will spit out for you. But once you have that, by virtue of just having a valid SPDX SBOM from Yocto, that means that you are in the top 1% of probably the companies out there. I co-lead one of the CISA working groups on SBOM generation, and my co-leader there is at Lockheed Martin, and they have a lot of legacy code, and a lot of that code is C and C++ code, and the challenge for generating SBOMs for C and C++ code is tremendous, right? There was a talk at FOSDEM this past weekend about from my friend Chris Swan gave a talk about how he does SBOMs for C and C++ code. Now that's new C and C++ code, but backdating and trying to fix this for like 20-year-old and generate SBOM with 20-year-old C and C++ code is just like, it might be cheap to just rewrite the code in a new language rather than try to, depending on how complex the code base is, of course, then try to figure out how to generate an SBOM for that.
And do you think companies will have the budget for that?
This is why it's so important that this is coming from a legal perspective. Because if there was no stick here, there's no way this would happen, right?
Yeah.
And
there is no carrot for sure, so we need the stick, right?
Correct. And I mean, well, there has been a carrot for many, many years, but it never really worked because it's one of those things that security is always an afterthought. It's like very, very few companies out there will actually proactively do good security. Not to say that there aren't companies that aren't doing this. There are plenty of companies that are doing really good security, like just because it's in their DNA. I mean, we at Screenly, we try to be really paranoid about security, do security really well, but I do recognize that we're in the very small minority, and we obviously are not doing anything near what the Googles of the world are doing, right? Because they have obviously teams that are order of magnitude bigger than our company just doing security, right? But I'm not a huge fan of legislation in general and over-regulating markets, but I think it's very clear based on the past decade that security will not get fixed unless there is a proper stick with really, really severe consequences. And that's, I think at the end of the day, is what CRA is. You had executive order in the US who's kind of enforcing the same thing for people selling to the government, which kind of trickled down to the enterprise world as well. But yeah, like to answer your question, like I think an SBOM is cleanest universal statement that you can make, the fact that you know what you're doing from a software perspective. Now, I think anybody who's actually spent any serious time in the world of SBOM will know that generating a complete SBOM is very difficult, because
super difficult, yeah.
But you could also not prove that you are delivering a complete SBOM, because you can sign it cryptographically, you can do all these fancy things, but you could also like remove a line in there before you sign it and say, here's my SBOM, and you're like, cool, I have to take it at face value. But even if you do, that's still a step in the right direction, a massive step in the right direction.
No, absolutely. I think, it's going to be super hard. I think it's in December 2027 when the law.
Yeah, I think that's when they have to properly rectify it, yes, across all member states.
I think it's super important to give this transparency as well to users. I'm not sure who's going to be interested. No, I hope that it's not going to be like GDPR thing.
I really hope it won't be that either. No, I think so. I'm part of another working group called Transparency Exchange API, where we try to like build a framework around how you distribute SBOMs, essentially.
Okay.
So I'm not a lead there, but I'm just part of that community, and part of that is like, how do you do discovery of SBOMs? So like, one thing is generate an SBOM, but if you're looking at so Sista has something called a sharing primer, which is like defining stages of sophistication of SBOM consumers and producers, and they really, long of the short is that they call for automation, and I think that's the key part. Like if you speak to big enterprise, they already do SBOMs, but the reality is that, at least based on the conversation I've had, when you actually dive into it, they're like, yeah, I receive an SBOM by email, I chuck it into SharePoint, and that's the end of the life cycle. That's how a lot of it goes today. So we need a better mechanism, and not only that, we also need like SBOMs are never done. SBOM is a snapshot in time truth, and every CI/CD pipeline you run will generate a different SBOM.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So you need a standard way of discovering and sharing SBOM, and that's just shameless self plug. That's what Spomify is doing as well, building a platform around sharing SBOMs and sharing them with various stakeholders. But that's an important part of this as well, is being able to share them. So it's a living document, right? Or not living document, but you know what I mean. It's a moving target. But I think that like if you guys can produce SBOMs from Yocto directly, which I don't see a reason why you couldn't if you're using the Yocto build stack.
Yeah, and we are thinking if we can as well generate SBOMs from the Balena builders, for example.
Yeah, I mean,
not sure how deep we can go, no? Depending on the
as long as you have log files, yeah, you can. Remind me again, you're using a combination of Alpine and Docker images, Alpine and Debian images, right, for the ones you have in your repository. Yeah, I mean, for both of those, you can just use like Sneak or Trivia or something like that to generate an SBOM. That should be easy enough to do, actually. But
so we are.
Yeah, okay, so that should be easy enough to do. But by doing that, you're like way ahead in the game, right? But you are also a platform that other people are building on, right? So you are a subcontractor for somebody else who ships software. So like, but for them to be able to meet CRA, you need to be able to meet it first.
Yeah. And I think we are going to see a lot of companies who decided to not use products like Balena, that will need to decide if they move to something like Balena or competitors, because it's cheaper for them to maintain all of this CRA thing instead of building their own solution. But on the other hand, probably there will be as well open source solutions.
Although all the big distros are all working on SBOMs. They might not have announced them yet, but all of them have working groups internally that are working on generating SBOMs. Like this is, everybody knows that it needs to happen, right? There's hardly a secret in the industry. But I mean, I think that is what I anticipate is going to happen. I think there will be, at the tail of this year, there will be a lot of people that will have panic attacks when they realize that, oh, holy shit, we need to adhere to this. And now they don't have that much time left.
Absolutely, because if you need to, as you mentioned before, you need to rewrite all of the source code of your product. Yeah, and it's December 2027. You will need to have it. No, you have 2 years now.
It's not long.
That looks like a long time, but it's not.
In particular, if you are like one of those conservative organizations where it takes you 6 months to get a software update out, then you really do not have much time. So yeah, the time to start is 6 months ago.
Probably, yeah. The sooner the better. And I think this is something that we need to educate all the industry of companies and communities who make connected products, that this is something that they need to start thinking now, or the sooner the better.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean,
this will be a win-win for everyone, actually.
It really is. And you guys can help making the platforms better by building that into the steps, right? So that standing on you as a platform so that people can do less work themselves, right? And that's where I ultimately think it's going. And that's where we need all the operating system vendors to essentially provide that. So if you're using that, you can say, yeah, here are my dependencies, here's my SBOM of mine, but I'm also running all of this, and then you point to that, right?
And then how do you think that companies are going to think about the concept of updating constantly operating systems of devices?
That's a paradigm shift, right? That's a big paradigm shift that paradigm shift maybe is not the right word. It's a generational shift, right? Because it's people who grew up in the DevOps world, the concept of constantly pushing is just a normal thing. Whereas if you're coming from a traditional waterfall structure, dev flow, where you're like, every 6 months release, and we plan that a year before, obviously that's faulty for many reasons, but the reality is that shift is happening, and we're moving more towards rolling releases in general, right? I think that's where most work is going towards. But like I had a lot of conversation about this, because there's also conversation in the SBOM world, like how do you version things? Like if you always have a rolling thing, how do you track things? But I think that's a generational thing that eventually, I mean, the tools, there are so good tooling today. And if you automate everything, if you start by automating things, that's paves the way for doing more frequent releases. But if every release you do requires 15 people sign off and 12 different manual interactions, then that's you're setting yourself up for failure, right? And I mean, you coming from IoT world, and I've heard other people on the podcast describing how people in some companies build BIOSes, and it's literally like some guy compiling this on his desktop machine that sits collecting dust on his desk, right? And it's just like, that's so crazy in so many ways. And like, we need to have fully automated builds. We need to be able to generate SBOM on build time. We need to be able to sign every artifact from there. Everything needs to happen in the CI/CD pipeline, right? And I think that's you're right. You're the one that you're kind of one of the first waves, or Balena is kind of the first waves of like DevOps IoT, right? But we have, for every customer of Balena, there's probably 10,000 of non-Balena customers, right? That are still stuck with the old ways of doing things, where some developer builds something locally, FTPs it up to some server, where some person on a QA team downloads it, and if you're lucky, they have an MD5 hash on that, right? And that's how much of the world still works, unfortunately.
Yeah, I remember talking with a lot of companies, and I remember one telling me, we don't use Balena because we have our OTA system running in our Linux devices. And I say, that's fine. We not only have an OTA system, for example, we also update operating system versions. And at that moment, that was a German guy who was thinking like, but we don't need that. Like, what do you mean you don't need that? No, we have a 10-year-old SUSE minimal distribution that don't need updates. Like, what do you mean, a 10-year-old? What? So you are one of the selling to a lot of companies your solution, and
Yeah.
a 10-year-old
And you're running on something that's EOL up, like by the time you're selling the product, right?
And probably 10 minutes before he was telling me that their OTA system was super secure and super, and then then
it's so
you
reliable
scratch a little
never
bit
run it.
and you see things like that. So I think this will do a lot of good for the industry. Let's see how US people it's going to see this, but I hope that they will have similar stuff in California or like in the GDPR happen. Yeah.
The way I envision this to play out is the executive order was like what kickstarted it all, essentially. That trickled into CRA. We've seen some new legislation coming through. So the new version of NIST cybersecurity framework stops just shy of saying that you need SBOMs, but it kind of calls for software transparency. PCI DSS 4.0 kind of states that you kind of need an inventory, which is kind of code word for SBOM. My guess is that the next version of ISO 2701 and SOC 2 will all mandate SBOMs. Because it's just that has to happen, right? So if you are even touching anything compliant, you will need to do this. And the beauty of this is that the second you deliver an SBOM with your dependencies and all that, the second you do that, you no longer have plausible deniability on running end-of-life software. And that's going to itself cause a lot of people to revisit how they do things. And I think that's the transparency side of it. It's going to force people to actually do things. And one of the reasons why I've heard people are reluctant to SBOMs is because they now have plausible deniability about the fact they're actually running a lot of EOL software. But the second they have to generate an SBOM, they no longer have plausible deniability.
Yes. But I think with the new, as you mentioned, it's a generation thing, right? The generational change. I think new generations don't care about share these type of things. I think there were previous generations were more scared of. I'm gonna show my secret sauce.
I think that depends of the size of the organization. I mean, just based on the conversation I've had with people when I put my SBOMify hat on, is that larger companies are very reluctant to share SBOMs publicly, but it's probably going to be shared on a need-to-know basis, right? Whereas smaller startups, they'll be like, well, here's my SBOM. But in larger organizations, you will have to have like legal signing off of things. So it very much will vary on the size of the organization, I would say. But just having it is still a step in the right direction. Cool. I think we covered a lot of ground today, and a very good deep dive on how you guys see security and all that, because that's a really interesting one. Before we wrap up, anything else you want to cover before we hit the stop button?
Yeah. Well, something interesting that I see more and more as a trend is that probably, IoT concept is going to disappear, right?
How so?
Yeah, because IoT is just enabling, right? Products to be connected. So it looks like when you put IoT, you're killing that product. So I see more and more this trend of, like, let me give you like an example. Now, Tesla car is an IoT car, right? But IoT is anywhere in the website, not needed, right?
I see what you mean. It's just expected that it's connected.
Exactly. So, or it's not expected. Maybe you don't know that Tesla is connected, but when you learn that it's connected, now it's probably choosing some of these protocols, IoT protocols. So the thing is that, you don't need to. So if you want to create a product that it's connected, don't need to call it IoT. Just say that it's connected or whatever, but try to let's kill this concept of IoT. And,
I think that's a very fair point, right? It just more or less becomes connected or de facto. We can't come to expect it, more or less. I think that's a fair point.
So take that into account if you want to make a product.
and go to Balena.
No, well, if you don't want to go to Balena, this is as well one of the reasons why Open Balena exists, right? So we don't want people to reinvent the wheel. So, of course, I think I was not in the company when Open Balena was created. So that was one of the, when you want to work with the big companies as a startup, no, they always there is this question of what happens if your startup just disappears. So the easy answer is I have this open source stack, so you will be able to migrate from Balena Cloud to Open Balena. Nowadays, I think it's more for enabling developers. We know that there are companies who, for whatever reasons, for example, we know one company that works with the U.S. Army, for example, and they cannot share anything with third-party companies. So it makes sense. But we enable these companies to don't reinvent the wheel, to start using something. So my suggestion, instead of using Balena, that it's fantastic if they can use it, it's don't reinvent the wheel. Just try to use something that it works, that exponentially helps you. And
I mean, I can
think on business models.
I can testify that it works. We have Antheas running. We got pretty decent sized fleets of Antheas running on Balena, which is
that's right.
Just works. Just works. So indeed, absolutely, I can recommend. I've been using Balena since the very early days, and it's a great platform. So if you want to try it out, you should. Perfect. Marc, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really much appreciated. So have a good one. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for inviting.
Cheers.
See you. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.